What are the expectations for second-year Denver Broncos running back Javonte Williams, who is electrifying as a rookie, but going into year two, are the expectations higher now that he might become the premier back? We talk about options behind him, and Broncos Country shares their thoughts as well on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome back into a brand new episode of Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast here on the Locked on NFL Network, your team every day from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, joined alongside by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger. Both of us, we cover the Denver Broncos for the Locked on Network and 9 News. Broncos Country, thank you so much for making Locked on Broncos your first listen or your first watch of the day every single day. Free and available everywhere you get your podcast and your favorite podcasting provider, or watching us here on YouTube. Make sure, if you're not doing so already, hit that subscribe or that follow button so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage all year long. But Sayre, as the slow offseason wears on, as the Denver Broncos build up to the NFL draft, we do know that George Paton's pre-draft press conference will happen this upcoming Friday. There'll be a lot of great tidbits that we'll grab from that, maybe get some clarity as to where the Broncos are leaning with round number 2, pick number 64, or they could trade back up in round 1 potentially. I don't know what that would cost, but excited to break down all the action with you on today's episode of the show, my friend.
I am too, Cody. Wasn't it last year's pre-draft press conference where George Paton was like, we really put ourselves in a position where we don't need to draft a cornerback. And then he goes and turns around and takes Pat Surtain. I love the pre-draft press conference because it always tells you a lot without telling you really anything at all. So I'm excited to hear what he has to say always. It'll be nice for Broncos fans too to hear from our fearless leader, the state of the team and some of the moves that he could make or has made. But man, I can't help but feel that the position we're going to talk about today might surprise people with how much it'll come into focus during the NFL draft.
And that's going to be a running back here. We're going to focus on Javonte Williams. But before we talk about the expectations for Javonte, we have to talk about the running back position in a whole here for this Denver Broncos football team. And Sayre, how will the Broncos plan to use their running backs in 2022? Now, one thing I go back to Nathaniel Hackett mentioning, he brought up something that, I think in today's day and age, you have to have multiple guys that can carry the ball there. So he kind of hinted that for Denver, there will be this by-committee approach here for the Broncos, especially for Javonte Williams, who is rumored to be the premier back now for Denver coming into 2022. How do you feel about a potential committee approach for Denver? I mean, who is running back 2 right now for the Broncos? Is it Mike Boone?
Well, that's a great question, Cody, because as I see it right now, and look, I was wrong about the tight end thing. I'll admit that. I'll eat that plate of crow that I thought the Broncos would be much more active at tight end than they ended up being. But right now, my new thing is I don't know where the running back by committee is going to come from, because who is the committee right now? The committee is Javonte Williams and 2 guys that have really done nothing in the NFL. And I mean that with all due respect. I've never made it to the NFL, and I could never make it to the NFL. So all due respect to Mike Boone and Demarie Crockett. But man, Mike Boone had 6 touches last year, Cody, and I put out an opinion last week that drew a ton of negative reactions from Broncos fans all over the place, where I was talking about, hey, don't be surprised if running back could be on the radar at pick number 64 because of the question that we're asking. And so people are on there saying, no, we got Mike Boone, he'll be fine. Then you just throw a late round pick out there. And I'm like, Mike Boone had 6 touches in 8 games last year. He was injured most of the season after an injury that took place during those joint practices and training camp. I'm trying to figure out where this blind faith in Mike Boone comes from. And you know me, Cody, I'm as optimistic as it comes. Yeah. I just don't know. I mean, I might need to be sold on Mike Boone because as I see it right now, a running back behind Javonte Williams, if we're going committee style, is a big need.
I think you're right there too, and maybe I'll hype up Mike Boone a little bit here because here's what the things that I've seen from Mike Boone. Like when Alexander Mattison and Dalvin Cook, they each got hurt in Minnesota. He had to be the guy that stepped up. He had a couple 100-yard games filling in as that rusher there. He's flashy. He's a good special teams guy. There's that dynamic that's presented there, but can he be a number 2? And I think where a lot of Broncos country's excitement is here with Mike Boone, Sayre, and I think you're spot on. Like we don't have a big sample size to say that Mike Boone is definitively RB2 here for this team. Like that is simply wide open right now for this Broncos football team. And I do think that one of the things that should be considered is, despite the fact that we saw some exciting flashes from him against the Kansas City Chiefs, that is simply a flash in the pan, right? That's not the real perspective yet on potentially who Mike Boone truly is as a running back. Now, if that flash in a pan is a resemblance of maybe what he could be, then yeah, I think I'd be a little excited here about Mike Boone. But I do agree with you. I think that it is widely up in the air. You have Javonte Williams and the Broncos, they wanted to have this interest in Melvin Gordon potentially. Melvin had interest in returning, but Melvin didn't want to be the backup. Melvin wanted to be the premier feature back. And I just don't know if that's a big thing that the Broncos are willing to do right now, especially where Javonte is at. But you are right. Like guys like Demaria Crockett and Mike Boone, widely unproven behind a guy like Javonte Williams entering year number 2. Does Denver want to take the risk of going into a season with a young running back stable that doesn't have a lot of proven guys? But then again, same thing with the NFL draft. I think that you can add talent there, but is the guy that you're going to get in the NFL draft potentially at running back, Sayre, are any of those guys potential better options than maybe Mike Boone and Demaria Crockett? I think that's a great question here.
It really is, and I think it's something that George Payton and the scouting department are going to have to consider. Who in this draft class is ready for a big workload? Because you look back at Nathaniel Hackett's offense just last season with Green Bay. This is very interesting to me because a lot of people seem to think, well, either they're fine with the depth they have at running back right now, or because of Russell Wilson's arrival, that means that we're not going to have to focus on the running game as much, which isn't really the case. Aaron Rodgers, back-to-back MVP seasons. Just last year, Cody, the combined touches for Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon with the Green Bay Packers, they had 444 combined touches last season for the Green Bay Packers, over 2,300 total yards from scrimmage. Those are from just the two running backs. So, and obviously some of that is what their involvement is in the passing game, but those were pretty evenly split. They each had over 200 touches. So if we're talking about Nathaniel Hackett's preference, the committee approach may be something that we need to start focusing a little bit more on because the Broncos didn't bring back Melvin Gordon, and at this point, they still could. But just at this time right now, I think running back is a very underrated position of need. It's not like a typical backup position where you're talking about, well, this is in case of an emergency. No, this guy's going to get a lot of touches, and I was kind of thinking maybe 120, maybe 150. Turns out that may be on the conservative side in the estimate in terms of how many touches the running back 2 in Denver might have. So, Cody, to me, I think you have to attack who could be that guy in this draft that could touch the ball potentially 200 plus times in his rookie season.
Well, Broncos country, Sayre, Bedinger, and myself, we're eager for your thoughts on this conversation. Do the Broncos have a true definitive number 2 running back right now behind Javonte Williams? What are your thoughts on Mike Boone, Demaria Crockett, or whether or not the Broncos really need to invest in this year's NFL draft? Make sure you comment on the YouTube video with your response down below, or you can tweet us on Twitter at Cody Roark NFL, at Sayre Bedinger, at Lockdown Broncos. But coming up here in just a moment, we're going to get into the conversation about what are the expectations for Javonte Williams as he enters year number 2 in the National Football League. But before we do that, let me tell you about Athletic Greens, the sponsor of today's episode of the show. And I have been taking AG1 for the last 2 months. And I tell you what, I feel fantastic, Sayre. For me, I live a healthy lifestyle. I work out every day. But one thing I couldn't really overcome was bloating. For some reason, bloating was a huge issue. Now, Athletic Greens helps with gut health. And that's one thing that has helped me with bloating in my recovery from working out and obviously eating a good diet here. Plus, one scoop of AG1 contains 70 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. And this special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, focus, and aging. All of these things all in one with one scoop. And all you do is you put that scoop into 12 ounces of ice cold water. You shake it up for 20 seconds and then you drink it. I definitely feel the benefits that it's added to me. And I feel like I have more energy to go throughout my day. I have a lot of power to be able to drive through my workouts, especially when your voice is telling you, hey, you got to give up, like you're tired. I keep going, and AG1 has definitely provided me with a lot more boost. And I've also, I used to suffer from migraines a lot. I haven't had a migraine in quite some time, and AG1 has been a big driving force behind that. So to make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. And all you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/NFL network. Again, that is athleticgreens.com/NFL network to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. And right now, it's time to reclaim reclaim your health today and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition. It's just one scoop of cup of water every single day. That's it. No need for a million different pills and supplements to look out for your health. And our good friends over there, betonline.net. Betonline.net is your number one source for all your sports betting needs and stats. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of the Major League Baseball season. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Sayre, getting into the expectations here for Javonte Williams in just a brief moment here. Just want to say major thank you, major shout out here to Broncos Country. Thank you for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day. We appreciate you so much. Make sure you check out the Locked On NFL Ultimate Mock Draft partnership with Odyssey and the Locked On Network. That is ongoing as is. As you noticed, we had a bonus episode here on the Locked On Broncos feed. Go check out the Locked On NFL Ultimate Mock Draft to see maybe where the ideal Broncos selection is when it's all said and done at pick number 64. But obviously a lot of great insight and a great collaboration here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Now, Sayre, let's talk about the expectations here for Javonte Williams, Pookie. And the expectations are very high, I think, for him because this year he is becoming the team's premier back. But I think a lot of people confuse becoming premier back with becoming a bell cow back. I don't necessarily believe Javonte Williams is going to be this guy, and I don't think the Broncos want him to be a player that gets around 25 carries a game. It's just not sustainable with the 17-game NFL regular season schedule and one of the most physically demanding positions as is, despite all the runs that he had, the run through contact. The expectations are high here for Javonte Williams, but let's talk about it from the player standpoint. I think for him, obviously, it's always taking care of the football. I thought he did a pretty good job of that last year. There were two instances last season. There was one game against the Washington Commanders, and there was one game against the New York Jets where he had a fumble, and he lost it there. For the most part, I think this is important. Actually, the Commanders, when he didn't lose the fumble, Dalton Risner recovered it. Melvin Gordon lost the fumble at the very next play. I had to clarify, but two fumbles there for Javonte Williams last season. So, for him to continue to take care of the football, I mean, as cliche as it sounds, that's the running back's top priority, ball security.
Well, it is. It has to be. And that's exactly what Javonte Williams needs to focus on, because if he is going to be the primary or featured back or whatever you want to call it, he's got to be able to make sure that he limits or eliminates turnovers. And remember, Philip Lindsay, for the longest time, he didn't have a single fumble. So we know that it's possible for these backs to hold on to the ball. And you hate to see those mistakes that they always seem to happen at the worst possible time. Not that there's a convenient time for a fumble, right? But it did cost Javonte a touchdown last year. One of his fumbles did. I remember that. So I know that factors into everything, ball security. But I think one of the things for me, Cody, that I really want to see Javonte Williams focus on is what you kind of alluded to just a bit ago, really making sure that he's fresh. Like, just because you draft a running back in the second round doesn't mean you need to run them into the ground until they fall apart. I just think that's a really bad strategy. We saw that this past year with the Tennessee Titans, just Derrick Henry getting injured, and that just affects your whole season. I feel like for the Denver Broncos with Javonte Williams, it's not that you want to limit him or make him kind of a bench player or anything like that, but you definitely want to have somebody with him that can keep him fresh. And I think you want to maximize his effectiveness as well in the passing game, which is something that I can't wait to see now that the Broncos have Russell Wilson at the QB position.
Can the Broncos evolve Javonte Williams in this area? I mean, I think when you look at the offensive scheme from last season, Sayre, I think a huge issue was really the offensive scheme. Like we talked about, a lot of the issues I think were really scheme relative. And I think somebody on our YouTube comment section made a great point. A lot of our former quarterbacks that have played on this Broncos team get a lot of blame, but it's also the coaches too, like the coaching staff and the coordinators. I feel like you and I have been pretty fair about calling out how bad the Broncos offensive ineptitude has been the last several years here. I do think Javonte Williams will probably be featured a little bit more in the passing game, but I kind of go based on the comparison of how the Green Bay Packers kind of operated things. You look at Aaron Jones, he was more of that pass-catching running back in comparison to A.J. Dillon. I mean, depending on what the Broncos do, whether it's the NFL draft or whether it's a free agent that they bring in, so I think that we're still about a month away from really determining, or actually not a month, a couple of weeks away, maybe a month away from really figuring out, okay, who would be the projected A.J. Dillon role in this offense and who would be the projected Aaron Jones role? Like, who's going to be more of a pass catcher? And that's not to say that Javonte Williams can't be both a rusher and a pass catcher. I think he has all the tools in his tool shed to be able to do just this. I think that's something to keep an eye on there. But, outside of that too, it's got to be more than just splash plays, right? I think a lot of people have talked about this, and we obviously saw a lot of feedback in our Broncos community about expectations here for Javonte. There were some crazy runs that Javonte had. I mean, he had about one crazy run a game where he just carried defenders with him or ran through contact. You love to see that. But I think people want more big time splash plays, like the plays that we saw against the Pittsburgh Steelers, where you fake the handoff and you pitch it to the outside, and he runs all the way down. He almost gets to a touchdown and then gets brought down. And obviously, there's the whole celebration there. But you want to see more splash plays like that from Javonte Williams, or like the Los Angeles Chargers in Denver, where he sidestepped two defenders, got upfield, and just took it all the way down there. Denver fans want to see more of that. And I think that's a realistic expectation. I don't feel like I'm being too extreme on that.
I don't think so either, Cody. I think that's spot on. And really, there's a lot of times last year where Javonte he didn't do quite as well as Melvin Gordon for, I would say, majority of the season. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, or maybe sound off in the comments if you disagree with me on this. I feel like Melvin Gordon was better at, kind of just avoiding contact at the line of scrimmage for the most part. Javonte Williams was our angry runs guy. Every week he was a candidate for some big highlight run on angry runs. But then it was really Melvin Gordon that was gaining the bulk of the yardage between the tackles, picking up those tough first downs. And yeah, Javonte Williams did a great job. A lot of times, he'd be dead to rights 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage, and he would turn a 2 yard loss into a 2 or 3 yard gain. But he only averaged 4.4 yards per carry in his rookie season, despite how great he was at breaking tackles. So I think he has to shoulder some of the blame for that in terms of, finding those holes, finding those running lanes, committing to the running lane, and not always seeking out contact, but trying to avoid it at times and utilize that open field elusiveness, because I think he is a bit more elusive than he's given credit for. I mean, he's not going to spin around a bunch of guys, on a given play. But at the same time, I feel like he has an opportunity to create even more as a runner. Like you said, those bigger splash plays, those are going to come more often if Javonte's not having to run right into somebody against a stacked box. And I think, again, Russell Wilson can really, really help in that regard. So he's got to see things a little bit better in year two. But I think that's a reason to be excited. If Javonte Williams can be better than what we saw as a rookie, I feel like Broncos fans should be absolutely giddy about that.
Hey, the expectations could be even higher, and he could be the perfect storm that is brewing for this Broncos offense in the Valley. Broncos country, coming up here in just a moment, Sayre and I, we're going to get to some Broncos community members' responses on Twitter about some of their expectations for Pookie in 2022. We get to that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about the other sponsor of today's episode of the show. It's a good friends over there, rockauto.com. And if you need anything for your vehicle, rockauto.com, they have everything that you could be looking for, whether it's brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, or even brand new carpet inside your vehicle. RockAuto.com makes it super easy for you to navigate their site. You can go on there and you can search and find the best prices for you based on brand specifications and even the price points that you want for something that you need for your vehicle. RockAuto.com also delivers it directly to your doorstep, and prices are always reliably low, whether you're a professional or a do-it-yourselfer. Why spend 30%, 50%, or even 100% more for parts at local chain auto parts stores or car dealerships when you can get them cheaper at rockauto.com? So go to rockauto.com right now, right here today, to see all the parts available for your car or truck, and make sure you write Lockdown Broncos in there. How did you hear about his box, so that they know that we sent you? Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. And as we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos, we'll get to some Broncos community Twitter responses. But once again, Broncos country, thank you so much for making Lockdown Broncos your first listen of the day. If you're watching this on YouTube, please do us a favor. If you love this episode, make sure you smash that like button and comment for the algorithm. It helps us grow to even more members in Broncos country. Thank you so much for all your support. We really appreciate you for tuning in and listening to us talk Broncos football all year long here. But Sayre, let's get to some Broncos community members' expectations here for Javonte Williams. And I feel like there were some fair points made for the most part. And I'm going to start off with Christopher Allen here. He says, better vision. We already know that he can break tackles, but hopefully he can make more people miss and save his body a bit. And it goes back to what we were just talking about. Sometimes there was a lot of times that he'd be hit at the line of scrimmage or behind the line of scrimmage and make something happen. It'd be great if we could just see him burst through and not necessarily have to go through that in order to get, go back 2 yards to fight for 5. I think that would be ideal. And I think a lot of that was based on the offensive scheme, but I do see this as an area where Javonte can grow as a pro.
I think so too. It's really an area that he has to get better at, right? Because I mean, he's now going to an offense where vision and instincts and all of that, making a quick decision on when you're going to make your cut in that wide zone type of offense, that's going to be critical for him going forward. So I feel like that is a fantastic point that Christopher makes. And I think that goes along with what Franco has to say. Franco Aguilar, I hope he starts to hit the running lanes better instead of bouncing outside. He's going to need it in this zone scheme. So you need him to be better at short yardage gains as well. And that goes back to what I was saying. Like, we had a lot of those splash plays last year. There's the angry runs. And every week, Javonte Williams had a candidate for angry runs, and rightfully so. I mean, that part, we can't really take anything from him in that regard. He is a beast when it comes to breaking tackles in the open field. But it's the shorter runs, I guess you could call them, the vision in between the tackles, the ability to just pop off 5 yards a carry. I think that's, for a guy with his pedigree, a running back that you traded up to select in the top 40 picks. I don't personally think it's out of the question to ask for that guy to average you 5 yards per carry. I think that's a reasonable expectation, especially going into year 2. So I think that's a great point that Franco makes as well.
I think our next two responses, too, are actually kind of on the same lines of this. Chris Akris says, I'd like to see him get stuffed at the line for little to no gain less often, because there was, puzzling portions of last season. Even Eric P says reduce the negative carries. The thing that kind of stood out to me last year, like, how many times did the Broncos have like a 3rd and short, or like even against the Kansas City Chiefs, they have a one, or like inches or 1 yard to go to pick up a first down to give them a 1st and goal. And there was a miscommunication by Teddy Bridgewater, obviously, but like Javonte gets stuffed in the backfield on that, and it ends a potential drive that maybe changes the whole entire landscape of that game in Arrowhead last season. Like, there are instances of that, but I don't necessarily put that on Javonte. But I do think that this is where the offensive line also has to get better in terms of run blocking. But it does help if Javonte with the vision is there. I think that's a great point that these guys have made here. But, one of our good friends as well, Kareem Gomezs, had mentioned a very interesting thing that he has an expectation for Javonte Williams. Care to share?
Yeah, absolutely. Kareem, thank you. Thank you for putting this out there because, man, I have Javonte in my dynasty league, and I would absolutely love, love, love to see this come to fruition, Cody. 50 plus receptions for this season. Again, we're talking about Javonte Williams taking over the number 1 running back role in Denver. He was only credited with 1 start last season, so he wasn't the running back 1 last year. That was Melvin Gordon. Javonte is moving into a new role. For many that maybe just watched the Broncos last year and just didn't really think much of it, Javonte wasn't the starting running back. And now he's going to be, which means his role is going to be substantially increased in every facet, especially the passing game. 50 plus catches. I think Javonte is capable of it. And not only do I think he's capable of it, but Cody, as we're talking about expectations, we're talking about what can he do differently or better in year 2 as a player. I think when you give a guy like this more opportunities in space, oh man, it is going to amplify his strengths so much to get Javonte Williams out into space and catching more passes. I feel like getting him 50 plus receptions should be a priority for the Broncos and for Nathaniel Hackett, and getting him involved in this way. I would be very excited to see this. And I think if 50 plus catches, if you're estimating right at 50, that should put him around the 275 to 300 potentially overall touches on the season, which again, as a dynasty football player, I'm all for it.
We'll see how it all pans out here for Javonte Williams. A lot of love for Pookie by Broncos country, but also some areas where he can continue to grow. And how can Nathaniel Hackett, the additional Russell Wilson, maybe amplify what Javonte Williams is good at and make him great at it here in 2022? That is a huge question. But Broncos country, we want to know your thoughts on this episode down below. If you're watching on YouTube, let us know in the comment section. Smash that like button. So comment for the algorithm, and also on Twitter if you want to tweet us your thoughts on the show at Lockdown Broncos, at Cody Roark, NFL, at Sayre Bedinger. You can tweet us. Our DMs are open as well. We want to look forward to hearing from you in Broncos country. We appreciate you so much for making Lockdown Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. The Broncos offseason program continues here this week. We have some insight here. Broncos players will meet with the media here on Tuesday, here today. We'll have some recap on Wednesday's episode of the show for you as well. But with that said, Broncos country, mile high salute. Sayre Bedinger and myself, we have you covered all week long here. Locked on Broncos.